In this video, I'm going to cover some of the techniques that I use in order to take pictures handheld successfully at nighttime. The first one is pay attention to leading lines that you can use. One of the issues with nighttime photography, it can be easy to lose the kind of leading lines that give us structure and shape to our pictures. So it's worth paying attention to them. You can also use them in the way like in this picture here, where I'm almost creating two halves, the top left and the top right. The top left representing the darker background and the bottom right representing the brighter foreground. And so we see this figure moving into the background. As they're moving into the background, it's like they're transitioning from this light area, which is the foreground, to the dark area more on the top left, which is the background where we see the shard. These leading lines kind of converge and help push our eye towards the subject that's walking away from us. One thing I was really careful to do here was to not make the leading lines exactly touch the corner of the picture, because I think as soon as you do that, it becomes too obvious. It's like a forced composition at that stage. So a little tip for you is to have your leading lines, yes, come in from the left-hand corner, but maybe don't have them actually touch the corner itself. I often think that when people do that, it kind of breaks the illusion a little bit, because we become a little bit too aware of the composition and what the photographer did, because we think, oh, I see, they put the line right into the corner like that and got it there. And we don't want them thinking that. So if you look at this picture carefully, you can actually see it split into two halves, but I haven't made it literally down from one diagonal to the other. I've tilted it slightly off axis. So by doing this, you're not quite as aware of it until I point it out to you, but it's still there and it's having the effect without you being quite as conscious of it. How you hold your camera. And this is going to be one of those things where people say, what? Now, you know probably already you need to tuck your elbows in and have a stable platform. You want to have the camera up to your face ideally and hold it steady. And then when people want to take a picture in portrait orientation, they laugh at people that turn the camera this way and say that you should do this. And you see what the problem is, right? Is that this arm is now up in the air. So what we want to do is we want to go the other way and shoot that way that irritates people, but it is more stable because it keeps your arms tucked in. It makes more sense when you actually think about it. That's why you should do that. Take more than one picture. Put your camera into a continuous firing mode, but put it at a low frame rate, something like 3 frames per second or 4 or 5. This way you increase your chance of getting a sharp picture. The next tip I have for you is to shoot in tungsten white balance. The reason I like to shoot in tungsten white balance is because I like my nighttime pictures to have these cool blue tones. And shooting in a tungsten white balance is designed to combat the really orange lights that you can get in interiors sometimes. So tungsten is going to give you a really cool blue look. And if you do this in camera, whilst your raw file is completely flexible, the picture you'll see on the back of the camera, and if you're using a mirrorless camera through your viewfinder or on the back of the screen before you take the picture, it's going to be a closer representation to what you want your final picture to look like, assuming you want to go for that look as well. And this helps inspire us because we get to see what the picture is going to look like. We feel that we're doing the right thing. My next tip is about exposure. And it is to let the highlight regions of your picture blow. The reason I say this is because when we're outdoors at nighttime, those lights, the light sources, we can't actually see into them. They're actually so bright that they should be blown. So when we're taking pictures, we want to be looking for a histogram that looks a little bit like this. There should be a little bit of peaking happening on the right-hand side where we've got our lights or whitest part of the picture to represent those blown highlights. But we don't want to blow the highlights so much that the surrounding areas are losing color and information as well. So we should just see it peaking a bit on the right-hand side, perhaps a little bit more than we're normally comfortable with a histogram. But that is true to life of what a nighttime picture should look like. We will also see this bunching up on the left-hand side in the darker areas because most of the picture is going to be dark, so it should look like that. That's a normal kind of histogram that we'll get. Now, when it comes to our ISO, people like to keep that ISO as low as possible, and we achieve this by keeping our shutter speed as low as possible. And I agree with that. Generally speaking, you're going to get a better quality file out of a low ISO picture. But at the same time, don't be afraid to go to your camera's maximum ISO if it gets you the picture. You want to get your exposure correct. And whatever the correct exposure is the correct exposure. So don't be afraid to use the higher ISOs in your camera. Just freely use them. But also, it's a good idea to try and keep the ISO as low as you reasonably can by manipulating the shutter speed like we discussed earlier. When you're out in a city and you're looking for things to photograph, it's better to go to where the bright lights are, because obviously we need light to take the pictures, but it's very easy to walk away from the train stations and so on. And that's a good guide for you. A lot of the areas near to train stations, the streets nearby, they're going to be the more populated, the more lit areas. Now, whilst a high street next to a train station can be really busy, the streets off of those areas in cities just only a little bit busy, and they're really suitable for taking pictures. There's a lot of restaurants and bars and little offices and things where you can take photos. But a lot of these places have lights on at nighttime, which can give you some really interesting looks. And my next tip for you is that if you're taking a picture of something that's more of a landmark, try to have something in the foreground if you can. Adding some sort of foreground element, it could be a person, it could be someone on a bike or anything like that, just creates that human level of interest that we have. We see this as not just a picture of just that structure. It doesn't have to be a person, it could just be an object, a boat or something that lets us know something more about how people use that area. I hope a little tip like that helps you. And if it does, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider buying me a coffee. The link is in the description down below. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Thanks again, take care, bye-bye.